We're going to hear Lisa Rupert and Chantelle Krish. Lisa Rupert is the Director of Housing from the YWCA Metro Vancouver. With more than 20 years of frontline and management experience working in housing and violence prevention, Lisa Rupert has made a significant impact on the lives of hundreds of women and families across Metro Vancouver. Currently, she is the Director of Housing at the YWCA Metro Vancouver, where she oversees 7 housing communities for more than 430 low-income single mothers and their children. Throughout her career, Lisa has worked on projects that have influenced policies to support women living abuse through a collaborative approach and ongoing advocacy for the clients she serves. Lisa has created and implemented programs, facilitated workshops, been an active media spokesperson, and a dedicated volunteers on housing and violence prevention services across Metro Vancouver. And Chantelle Krish, she's the manager of the Advocacy and Public Relations from the YWCA Metro Vancouver. With a passion for social justice and communication, Chantelle understands the importance of connection between public opinion and public policy. Her experience in communications and advocacy in the private and nonprofit sector has enabled her to successfully connect with multiple stakeholders and raise awareness on issues affecting some of the most vulnerable populations across Canada. In addition to being a media spokesperson for the YWCA Metro Vancouver on issues affecting women and families across Canada, she has developed campaigns highlighting the high prevalence of violence against women in society and been successful in affecting policies to support marginalized women and their families living abusive relationships. Lisa and Chantelle, welcome.
Yeah, that's great. Hi, thank you, everyone. Thanks for that lovely introduction. And I'm Chantelle, this is Lisa, just in case you get confused. It's really great to be here because we had Rupert and her team come to Vancouver and hosted a much smaller symposium there looking at local issues. And so to come to Toronto and see some familiar faces, but unfamiliar faces, is actually really inspiring to the work that we're doing locally. So what we're going to do today is talk specifically about an advocacy and research project that we've done called the Mothers Without Legal Status Project. Before we get into it, just a little note about the YWCA. So we provide a range of services for women and families, and we have a holistic approach. And so we run everything from housing to childcare to youth education, but we also have advocacy as a core service area. And so I'm going to, first Lisa will talk about what the project entailed, who Mothers Without Legal Status are, and what some of the challenges are that they experience. And then I'm going to go into the advocacy strategies that we employed, what our guidelines are, and our rules and regulations around it, and how we were able to achieve some policy success through the execution of a public awareness and advocacy campaign. So thank you.
Hi. I, for many years, directly managed YWCA Monroe House, which was one of the first second-stage transition houses in Canada, opening in 1979. And Monroe House has always dealt with women who are leaving abusive partners who failed to sponsor them or canceled their sponsorship midway through and who ended up in our transition house. But in 2001, the province of British Columbia made several cuts to their income assistance policies, one of which was no longer allowing women who don't have permanent resident status or citizenship income assistance. And this created a huge barrier for women leaving. YWCA frontline staff were noticing this, of course, over a period of time, but by 2008, it had reached the point where there were so many women we were turning away who needed our support that we decided we needed to take this on as a major advocacy issue. And frontline staff produced a report called the Mothers Without Legal Status Report to examine the issue and develop policy recommendations. The other piece of it was that we produced a booklet for service providers, because what we were hearing from the women who were calling us was that when they talked to, for example, their social worker told them, apply for income assistance. When they called other organizations, they were told there's nothing you can do. Stay with your abusive partner until he sponsors you. So women were really not getting the answers they needed from service providers. Okay. Yeah, to the third slide. So we started the project in 2008, and it was published in 2010. And so who are we talking about when we say mothers without legal status?
Sorry.
We're talking about women who are involved or have been involved with Canadian men who are typically a citizen or a permanent resident of Canada. Some met their partners while in Canada, and some already had Canadian partners when they arrived. All of them were promised sponsorship by their partners. In some cases, the sponsorship started, but he dragged it out or canceled it. And in others, he just held it over her head for years, saying, yeah, I'll do it, and never doing it. And this is a way that those partners were able to maintain control over the women and the children. When the women tried to leave the relationship or were forced to leave the relationship by MCFD, they found themselves trapped between the immigration system and the family law system. The immigration system, of course, they don't have status. Most of them would have to apply on humanitarian and compassionate grounds to stay, which back in 2008 took about 2 years and now is 3 years plus. And that's a very long time, especially after the 2001 cuts to live without any income at all and in a precarious situation. But also, under the family law system, most of their abusive partners wouldn't let them take the children out of Canada. So they're really stuck. They could leave without their children, or they could stay and try and wait it out, not knowing what the results were going to be, and often being told by their immigration lawyers that there's about a 5% chance of being successful in an H&C application, even though in our experience, women in this situation typically have a very high rate of success. Okay. So what were the results? I mean, we weren't surprised by the results, but it was very useful for us as a booklet to do advocacy with both funders for our projects, but also with the provincial government, and in the future, we're hoping, with the federal government. So the biggest issue at that time for the women was they weren't entitled to income assistance. They couldn't support themselves and their children. And in British Columbia, transition houses and shelters only have a 1-month length of stay. So women were moving from shelter to shelter to shelter every month. And the other problem was that our second stage transition houses in British Columbia rely on rental income from the tenants. So most second stage transition houses wouldn't take women in this situation. And even those who would, who had a little bit of subsidy to give for rent, couldn't provide them with food or other necessities. The next one was that they weren't entitled to subsidized housing, even if they had some income. So some women had child support or savings, but subsidized housing would not let them in until they had their permanent resident status. Another issue were the school systems in British Columbia, who were very unclear on our own rules. They would not allow a lot of mothers without status to send their children to school unless they could pay international fees. And so there were some children who just simply weren't attending school. And then the other one is, of course, the long, long wait to get permanent resident status, which placed a significant burden on the women and on the children. A lot of the children were in extreme trauma. One of the families who came to us had moved 7 times in 7 months with 2 children after being in an abusive relationship with no status for 10 years. The children were extremely traumatized, and even after they stayed in our transition house for 2 years, when it came time to move into permanent housing, there was a suicide crisis with the oldest child because, again, losing absolutely everything all over again. So one of the goals is to speed up this process, of course. Oh, okay. So this one is just identifying a lot of the issues. That one should say scared, not seared. A lot of the other issues that are going on. So there are a lot of other issues. One of the big issues that we haven't even addressed yet is the medical system in British Columbia. Although there is BC Women's Hospital who will provide free services to pregnant women. Throughout the rest of the province, there's nothing like that available, and women come out with huge medical bills. One of our mothers without status from the interior who had to have a cesarean came out with a $15,000 medical bill. And the health care system just doesn't begin to address it. We're about to lose one of the free clinics we have in Vancouver that women were able to access, so that remains a pressing issue. Other things remain the fear of being deported. And it is, I think Rosa or one of the other panelists touched on this, that ex-partners frequently report women without status to CBSA. And even though if we go in with an advocate and a lawyer, they're not going to be deported, and we can give them the advice that means they probably won't end up in detention, but that fear hanging over their head is something really devastating. And even when women are told, all the other women we've seen in your situation have been successful, 2-year process, you can stay here, you can have the support you need, the terror that they live with every day, the uncertainty. And that impacts the children as well, and the ability to parent, the ability to live life on a daily basis. So there's a lot of stress going on.
Thanks, Lisa. So as you can see, and I mean, we heard this morning, that these are all complex, interrelated issues. And so when we look at our advocacy guidelines, we try to look for avenues and areas where we can approach these issues, but we are very clear in how we take on issues. And I think it was Debbie that was talking this morning about the challenges, the fear for nonprofits, for charitable organizations to even take issues on and try to advocate for systemic change. And so these are our guidelines. The first one, it must align with the values of the YWCA. So obviously issues supporting women, issues relating to women living free from violence, supporting women's roles within society. That's key. The vision of the YWCA is achieving women's equality. And so that while that's a very broad-based vision, it does encompass all of the things we're talking about today. It has to be related to our frontline experience. So Lisa and her team identifying that this is an issue, we need to have that experience on the ground to say, what are you seeing? How is this manifesting with your clients? It has to be supported by strong research. So in this situation, we conducted the report. We campaigned for funders to look for opportunities for people to actually financially support the research, because that's not something that's easy to do on the side of our desk. And so we were successful in working with the Law Foundation of BC to fund this report. And we need to have organizational capacity. I mean, we take on issues, again, like I said, where we hope that we can be successful, but we also recognize that advocacy is incremental and slow. So we need to have someone or dedicated people that can at least dedicate some time to this. And we recognize that this is a very difficult task working in our sector. So our advocacy response. So how do we carry out advocacy at the YWCA? First of all, we're very collaborative. So we look for win-wins with government. I know. In a presentation like this, it's good to have a couple of laughs, but we look for collaborative approaches with government, with other service providers, with media. We're not adversarial. We don't point our finger at organizations and government and say, this is not being done and you need to do a better job. Although that's the case, we recognize that that's a very valid approach, but we say we'd like us to work together and develop a solution together. And we found to have some success in this area. So our advocacy work is carried out on 3 levels. One is with the clients.
Yeah, so the first thing with the clients is to provide accurate information. That was also what the booklet was about, to make sure that everybody had the same information across the province. We have a legal advocate who works in our second stage transition house, but also will work with any woman who calls from all across the province. And one of the things she can do is accompany people to legal aid or give them the advice on what they need to say to get legal aid. Which is more difficult than it sounds. Also, she can help them find lawyers who will take legal aid, which are also in short supply in British Columbia. And then we developed a network of pro bono lawyers, because sometimes there are cases where they are denied legal aid. You can spend a long time trying to appeal it, but if we have the pro bono lawyers ready to take it over, and we only use them in those cases where there are denials or very difficult cases, that's really useful. And then we developed a template. People have to gather information for their H&C applications, and that can be daunting, and it can take a long time. So we developed a template for them to give to all people who might write letters of support, which can get that ball rolling a little bit faster and make sure all the information that's needed is in the letters. And we did that in conjunction with our legal advocate and one of our pro bono lawyers. And then we will also do advocacy calling those organizations. Sometimes organizations are reluctant to put anything in writing, and just to let them know there's no repercussions for you. We've written these letters for years, nothing's come back on us, just to encourage them to do it. Donors. We have sought out a lot of donors. Right now we have a group of donors who pay all the legal fees for people, mothers without status who are applying, because that's a huge barrier. They'll also do things, sometimes people need passports, they've expired, they can pay for new passports. And then they'll help with medical bills when those come up, or prescription glasses or emergency dental services. Housing. One of the unique things that our second stage does is that we provide at least 3 free spaces in second stage at any given time for mothers without legal status, and we provide them with gift certificates for food. We also connect them with, we have an emergency childcare program called Crabtree Corner, and they can be connected with that so that they can have free childcare because they're not eligible for the childcare subsidies in British Columbia. And then, of course, emotional support, which is always needed and shouldn't be devalued. And then things like we always have bus tickets on hand, just the little things like that that are always helpful.
Thanks, Lisa. And then we also advocate with government, as we've said. So relationship building with senior bureaucrats, crown corporations, and ministries is very important. So we try to find ways that we can connect with various levels of government and try to engage them on the issue. And so that doesn't mean just going to the senior bureaucrats and the government ministries when we notice a problem, but when we develop this report, we'll host an event and we'll say, we've developed this research report, we'd love for you to come and learn more about it, and try to keep them engaged throughout the process so that we have buy-in early on, and we recognize that, again, that's difficult. We also engage the business community, and so that's the third image here, and that's systems. So systems, general public, we do things like public awareness campaigns, which I'll talk about in a second, but we also engage the business community through the Vancouver Board of Trade. Our CEO is the incoming chair, and the reason we do that is because when the business community is aware of issues like this, they can start advocating on behalf of their staff as well. If they've identified issues of workplace violence against women, for example, they can start to develop some understanding and some key responses. And through the public awareness campaigns that we've had, we decided for the Mothers Without Legal Status project that on International Women's Day 2011, we would dedicate that to Mothers Without Legal Status in our project. Because while we did this research report, we didn't have much uptake from the media, and that's because we didn't really have a strategy. So we developed a media strategy. We connected it to this issue and this day because we know that on International Women's Day, the YWCA gets a decent amount of media attention. So why not use that as a platform to actually engage on a very specific issue? We moved quickly. So we developed a strategy where we met with the editorial board of the Vancouver Sun, we met with CBC and some other local newspapers, and we recognized their deadlines, and we worked as quickly as possible with them. We found a client who was, and this is a very challenging process, is to find a client with lived experience who is in a position that's comfortable to speak on behalf of her own experience. And we don't do this lightly. So we make sure that the client is in a position where she's out of the violence, where she's managed or had emotional support to manage her trauma, and where she's comfortable. And in this situation, we did have a woman, and we had a decent amount of boundaries that we set with the media, like not using her last name, not using her face, things like that. But we made sure that she was ready and protected. And then we leveraged our contacts, identified key stakeholders, and executed a plan. So these are the various stakeholders we engaged with. So community partners, Ministry of Social Development, the media, the Superintendents Association. That one's interesting because when the media came to us and said, okay, we want to do a story, it's going to be on the front page of tomorrow's paper, we thought, okay, this is an opportunity for us to call the Superintendents Association, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Housing, and say, we want to make this a win-win. And we want it, but how are you going to make it a win for you? And so the Superintendents Association, who was responsible for all the schools that were actually denying children or asking them to pay international students' fees, did some calling, worked very quickly, and identified that it was actually a communication issue with their frontline staff. And so we were able to come out and say, that issue is being dealt with. And the same thing happened with the Ministry of Social Development. We set up calls regularly, and we're continue to be in touch. Sorry, moving a little fast. So After this public awareness campaign and having a lot of public coverage, but as well interest from donors, the general public, we were successful on enacting income assistance. So our premier, Christy Clark, in 2011 or 2012 announced that mothers without legal status will now have access to income assistance. And while Lisa said this was the case before and they actually took it away, we didn't remind them of that, but we did say that this is a great opportunity for women to actually live free from violence and have money to actually run their lives, or a little bit of money. In that, BC Housing, our ministry responsible for social housing, offered subsidized housing options for women who are on income assistance. And so this opened that door as well. We also were able to, as I said, with the Superintendents Association, have success with the frontline workers in the schools. Education for service providers. We continue to work with our partners collaboratively. This is a perfect example of that. And then public interest. And that's where donors come in. So when the donors started to see the success that we were having, and we keep telling them about it, they are interested in being part of systemic change and a solution. And so that's been an effective method as well. And then we're part of the YWCA National Network. So our head office is here in Toronto. There's also a YWCA Toronto office, and I'm a member of our advocacy committee where we have quarterly calls. So I inform them of this project, what we've been doing. We share all of our resources, and it's also a good way for us to examine the intersectionality of these issues, because while income assistance is an issue in BC, it's not an issue here, from my understanding, right? For mothers without status. And women in the north, they're dealing with a lot more refugee claimants than we are in British Columbia. So it allows us to sort of look at what the crossovers are, but also what the differences are. And what we found works nationally in advocacy is the federal ask. So the federal policy proposal around increasing the time for permanent residency applications, or speeding up that time. And so we've created a local policy proposal, which we've shared nationally with our contacts. And in fact, our national office here had a meeting with the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration Canada and had that on hand, so was able to provide that. So just the sharing of these resources and the ongoing updates with the national office has been a great help. So just to close, our next step is our federal advocacy, and we have 3 policy asks that we're looking at there. One of them relates to changes in speeding up the citizenship and immigration, the permanent residency applications. But the others is just yearly information and sharing between Citizenship Immigration Canada and the YWCA network to kind of coordinate a response. So where we're at, what these issues are manifesting in our housing communities, what can be done, how we can work together. And so I brought that federal policy proposal here, and it's somewhere out there. And there's also a resource on court-related abuse and harassment, which our legal educator provided. And so I encourage you to use those materials, or at least reference them if there's anything that might be of use to you. Then we'd be happy to help and oblige. And I think that's all. Thank you.
Thank you.